7 decades ago, the first television adaptation of Superman arrived. Now, it's time to rocket back to the 1952 to 1958 series Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves. In this rewatch podcast, my guests and I break down each episode, from its black and white crime drama beginnings to the kid-friendly color seasons, as we celebrate one of the most underrated Man of Steel depictions of all time. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the theatrical feature Superman and the Mole Men, aka The Unknown People, Parts 1 and 2, is Voices from Krypton author Ed Gross. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back here. It really is.
I'm very happy to have you here. You've been on my other show, Digging for Kryptonite. It's your first time here on another exciting episode, and we got you in just under the wire. This is the end of our season 1 coverage. We did it. We made it. We're at the end of season 1. It's been quite a ride. Thanks.
Yes, it has.
Thanks. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all of the guests who have joined us for our season 1 coverage. It's really been a blast to compare notes with everyone. And everyone's come in with sort of a different level of experience with Adventures of Superman and a different knowledge level, but all fans of the show and all fans of Superman. And it's been great to have these conversations. And I also want to thank the audience. Thank you to everyone, whether you listen to all of these or you just kind of popped in and out, whatever the case may be. I really do appreciate it. And especially those folks, I know there are at least a few who've been watching along with us and commenting and asking questions, and it's really been wonderful. So I thank the audience very much. If you've enjoyed the show, and if you haven't done so already, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Aside from feeding my ego, it does help make the show more attractive. I don't know how much bearing it really has in terms of the algorithm and all that business. I've gone back and forth on that over the years. It still remains a little bit nebulous to me. But if nothing else, I think it helps make the show more attractive when new people come to it and they can see what other people think about it. So if you're willing to take a minute to rate the show on Apple Podcasts and write just a few words, if you've been enjoying the show, I would really appreciate it. And yes, we will be back for season 2 in 2024. So we are going to take a significant break. I don't know when during 2024 we'll return, but stay tuned. Make sure you are subscribed via your audio podcast platform of choice. I don't know if the video versions will continue. To be honest, at this point, we will probably move away from the video component and focus on the audio only. So do make sure you are subscribed via one of the major audio podcast platforms, and stay tuned for our coverage of season 2 in 2024. It's coming. All right. Until then, we have the end of our season 1 coverage here. So Superman and the Mole Men, the theatrical feature that was later re-edited into season 1, episodes 25 and 26, aka The Unknown People, parts 1 and 2. I talked about this in a prior episode. Ed, it was a little bit of an internal debate that I had at the beginning of this podcast. Do I start my coverage, my podcast coverage, with Superman and the Mole Men? It was filmed first, and it ran theatrically before the show ever aired on television. Yet, the way I first experienced it was watching the season 1 DVDs. And of course, it's placed at the end of season 1 as the 2-parter. So in the end, I thought it would be effective to do it this way, since that's how I experienced it. And I feel like this gives us a nice sort of full circle conclusion here at the end of season 1. That was the rationale behind it.
Makes sense.
So look, a lot to unpack, as always, but especially in this instance. But listen, let me toss it to you first and start, as I always like to, with the personal side of all of this. So what is your history with Adventures of Superman? What memories do you have of watching? When did you first encounter it? Anything you'd like to share, I think would be great.
I've never seen the show. No, I'm just kidding. The reruns of The Adventures of Superman in about 1965 was my introduction to Superman. I mean, it was, I couldn't tell you what episode it was. I just remember I fell in love with the show. And I specifically remember The Unknown People. I mean, that was a big one for me. I really loved that episode way back then when I first saw it. And I was so obsessed with the show. I remember there's one time Superman on Earth, the first episode of the show was on, and I had something in my eye that I couldn't get out. So this whole episode, I'm listening to this show play, and I am like practically crying, trying to get whatever's in my eye out of my eye so I could watch the show. But, between sobs, I guess I heard it. But I fell in love with George Reeves as Superman. I also found out, I think may have told you this story, and the other thing, my father had a comic book called The History of Dogs. And then I discovered that Superman had comic books. I fell in love with both of those things at about the same time, and then discovered these comics of Superman, and everything grew from there. But George Reeves was like throughout the 60s and 70s. It was only when Christopher Reeve came along that I finally, I suddenly said, "Oh, George, you're going to have to take a little bit of a vacation. I got to focus on this guy right now." But my affection in watching these episodes again proved to me that my love for this never went away. That show and George Reeves playing Superman. So
That's great. And look, I know there are true diehard fans of Adventures of Superman for whom George Reeves is the only Superman, and that's totally cool, and I respect that.
yeah.
I think you and I are similarly aligned, and we've had various conversations about sort of being open to different interpretations. And
We go with the S.
we go with the S.
We,
Yeah.
we, we go with the S.
Do you mind speaking to that for a minute? Because
Sure.
I think that's such a beautiful sentiment. And again, I recognize for people listening to this, not everyone will share this, right? For some, it's whatever cements in your mind as the Superman. That's sort of it, and that's fine.
Right.
But I love your following the S bit.
Well, it's because I did fall in love with George Reeves as Superman, and that was my first exposure to Superman. And then they did the New Adventures of Superman on Saturday mornings. And I was 6 when that show debuted, and fell in love with that as well. And from that moment on, especially when you go out and you're going to use a used comic shop we used to go to on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, called My Friend's Bookshop, and we'd get back issues, and I'd build up this collection of all the comics that had the S on it, whether it was Action, Superman, World's Finest, whatever it may be. And then, Super Friends, I didn't enjoy the show, but I was happy Superman was there. Christopher Reeve comes along, and I loved it. And then guess what? I just continued going with it, because for me, it's about the character. It's the similar situation I have to James Bond, where I grew up with Sean Connery, but unless I want my adventures with James Bond to end in 1971 with Diamonds Are Forever for Bond, it would be the same thing with Superman. Do I shut down after George Reeves reruns? I just stick with those for the rest of my life? Or do I go to the point where I'm watching my adventures with Superman now and eagerly looking forward to Superman Legacy next year? Loved Henry Cavill, not all the material, but I loved Henry Cavill as Superman. I just go with it. I mean, Pee Wee Herman, God bless your soul. God rest your soul, rather. You want to cast Pee Wee Herman as Superman? Go ahead. I'm still going to go see it. You know what I mean? So it's what the character stands for, and I just have to go with it wherever it goes. I could not live. That's a little dramatic, but I could not stay home from a movie playing in a theater with Superman in it and not see it. Super Pets, I was there. I just had to go. So.
No, that's a beautiful sentiment, and I identify with that as well. I've talked a lot here, but mostly on my other show, Digging for Kryptonite, about how formative Smallville was for me, and how, in my mind, when I think of the character, Tom Welling is the incarnation that I think of first, but I love them all in different ways. And I think one of the things that's really been, especially over the course of doing all of these podcasts and going through all of this material in so much in depth and detail, and having these conversations and like really working with the material, you really see how each, especially on the actor side, each actor brings something different, and there's a different pocket of the character to explore, and they all have their space that they occupy and bring value to the mythology. So all that being said, of course, we're here talking George Reeves. One other question I wanted to ask you. So I mentioned in your intro, you were the author of Voices from Krypton, the unofficial oral history of Superman, available now wherever books are sold. I was fortunate enough to be one of your interviewees. Yeah, for people watching on YouTube, you just held it up. I was so honored that you interviewed me and included quotes from me in the book. On one of the pages, I'm quoted right underneath Brandon Routh. It was very surreal. I've been very proud of that. Yeah. Everyone who comes over, I'm like, look. So I encourage everyone to check out the book. What I was curious about is and I know this is kind of a big picture question, and I know probably all of this is such a blur. You spent so much time working on the book, but whatever may or may not come to mind. Like, how often did Adventures of Superman or George Reeves come up in your conversations with folks? Especially, I mean, obviously it's one thing if you ask them, but I'm curious how many times, if at all, like, people brought it up. Like how large did it loom in the conversations that you had?
It was fairly large. I mean, you say the general question you ask everybody is, who's your Superman, right? And I don't give my whole spiel about the S. I just want to know who their favorite is. And most people will say Christopher Reeve. That is the majority. But they'll say they grew up on George Reeves and loved George Reeves as Superman. What shocked me the most, though, in especially working on that section regarding the Adventures of Superman, was the fact that so many people that love that show specifically, they love that show. It's not that they even love Superman that much. They love George Reeves as Superman. And that surprised me because it was like, well, yeah, but what do you think of the character? Well, I don't really think of the character outside of Adventures of Superman. I'm like, that just boggled my mind. I couldn't believe it. But it was so heartfelt by so many of the people that talked about that show. They love it.
Yes, I mentioned this a little bit in our last episode, but I've definitely gotten more of a sense of what the Adventures of Superman fandom is like since I started this podcast. And yes, people are very passionate. They are very interested in the behind the scenes, in the production schedule, in the trivia associated with the show. There's an
Right.
intense level of interest about that. And what you bring up is interesting. I don't know that I've encountered this so much, but what you're saying does ring true. That there does definitely seem to be a contingent who, they're fans of this show, right? Not necessarily the larger mythology and other
Right.
incarnations, but it's this show. This podcast has probably not really spoken to them because what I like to do in this is look at this show in and of itself, but also in relation to the larger Superman mythology, because that's what's interesting for
Right.
me, right? And I'm exploring all these other facets of the character on the other show, and then again, for me, it's been wildly fascinating to look at all of these things and see, where we've seen echoes of these stories
Right.
in other eras and things like that. So for me, it's been endlessly interesting to do. But yeah, I know not all Adventures of Superman fans, well, might be looking for that, and I recognize it. But so it's interesting to hear that. I was curious, what kind of sentiment was expressed
That
in the
really
interviews.
surprised me, though. I mean, that really was surprising because, like I said, I'm so used to my thought process of it's Superman. That's what matters. It's Superman. But no, it wasn't even that it was Superman. It was that it was him, this actor, making. And so many people said he. And I don't get this quite. That he felt like a surrogate father to them. A number of people said that to me. That the character came across as a surrogate father. And when he was winking at the camera, he was winking at them, saying, "We're on a secret here. We know the secret. Nobody else does." So it was this connection that they felt with George Reeves that, as much as I feel a connection with Superman, the character, I never looked at, Christopher Reeve and sat there and said, "Oh, well, Chris is talking to me." You know what I mean? It's I don't know, but it was very interesting. I'm not putting it down. It just surprised me how many people felt that way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, that's the thing, you do hear so much about kids, an entire generation of kids who grew up on the show, and so I think especially if you're watching this at the right age, and
Mhm.
regardless of your home life, well, positive or not, but I guess especially, and I'm not saying the people who you talk to were necessarily in this camp, but maybe they were, but especially if maybe you didn't have that kind of role model in your life, and
Right.
Superman's there, and well, now you really got me thinking because yeah, I mean George Reeves, he was in his late 30s, I think 37, I think, when he started this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So not, which is, I'll be 37 next year. Not, it's not that old, but it's
And it's getting younger every day, right?
yeah. but I still feel like I'm 19, so that'll forever be in my head.
As do
But
I. I get it. I get that.
I know it is such a weird thing. I don't, it's not like I feel like, oh, I'm like 12 or 13, but it's like, I don't know, 19 or 20. That's kind of how once I hit that, that's sort of what I've always
I don't
felt I am.
I don't think I've ever lost my sort of youthful enthusiasm for this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, for many years I always wear Superman t-shirts. Not happening right now. Right now it's Godzilla for some reason. I don't know why. But so often I've worn them. And when I was younger, I used to think, oh, I wonder if people are thinking I'm such a dork because I'm wearing this, right? Now I wear them and it's like, think I'm a dork. Who gives a damn at my age? I mean, who cares? It's like I am who I am and I don't care. So anyway,
Yeah,
it's a
no, I think
little
following
tangent.
all of this stuff and talking about all of this well into our adult years, I think it's a wonderful thing and
Yeah,
helps preserve that youthful spirit. But no, I do think
absolutely.
about that. The fact that, again, especially if you have a whole generation of kids, And look, certainly, again, we've talked about this a lot. This first season was, far darker and grittier than the later seasons would be, and
Yeah.
it really was more of this noirish crime drama, and not really, not really meant for kids. But obviously, you had a lot of kids watching it and families and all of that. So I think if you have little kids watching this and a slightly older Superman, certainly older than the actors who will be cast in the decades to come, yeah, I don't know. I definitely could see kids looking to him in that sense. Like for me, it's always been. I know I always go back to the Smallville example, but what was, and you've heard this from me multiple times already, but for me, like one of the things that grabbed me so much about that show is I was a freshman in high school. Clark was a freshman in high school. So right, I wasn't looking at him in a paternal sense or even like a brother or anything. I was just seeing myself in the character.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone has a different experience. That's really really very interesting to hear that. It's. I guess I'm not. Yeah, I'm not shocked that that's sort of what you came across in those interviews. Very interesting.
It's interesting too, because if you find a character that you really like, that you can identify with. Now, this is totally going off the Superman tangent for 1 second, or road for 1 second, but like the Rocky movies, for instance. I know you're a fan of the Rocky movies, right? When Rocky 1 came out, I was 16, and it was all about going the distance in life and forcing yourself, no matter how impossible it seems, to push forward. You get to Rocky Balboa. I'm 46 when that comes out, and I get the message of it's not over. Right? What does he say? It's not about how hard you get hit. Life, hit life. It's how hard you get hit and keep on going. That's an important message. So it's like that with the Superman thing. But for me, Rocky was like that. It's like I got those bookended messages that came at those significant moments of my life, and it's so interesting when pop culture characters can hit you like that, as Superman hit these people on the George Reeves show. You
Yeah.
know,
Yes, I am a massive Rocky fan. I could do that whole Rocky speech from Rocky Balboa, but I
so
won't.
good.
Balboa is actually, it may be a hot take, but that is actually my favorite movie of the franchise. I love the original. I love,
Mhm.
look, 1 through 4. There's 5. It's a different category. But one
Everybody
through
says
four,
that. Five. Forget
but
five.
but look, 1 through 4. There's a lot of fun to be had in all of those movies, and the original, obviously,
Absolutely.
all time classic. But yeah, Rocky Balboa. Even though I was, much younger than the character when I was in college when that came out, but there was something about it. And again,
Right.
that notion of it's not about how hard you hit, it's about how hard you can get hit, and it's never too late. Like, it really
And keep
resonated.
moving forward. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, you just keep moving forward no matter what. So it's just, so
yeah.
anyway, I know people are like, what the hell's this got to do with Superman? But, whatever.
No, I think, look, this is an important part of all of it, so I'm glad we're spending the time on it. But yes, we will segue back to Superman and the Mole Men, aka the Unknown People, parts 1 and 2.
Right.
I'll talk a little bit about the production of this in a second, but let me give my synopsis here. Lois and Clark arrive in Silsby, Texas to report on the world's deepest oil well, only to find the operation being mysteriously shut down. When two small beings with large heads and furry hands, aka the titular mole men or unknown people, emerge from the earth below, their appearance frightens the townspeople, and a violent mob forms led by Luke Benson and his hounds, with Superman standing between them and the beings from below. So that's our synopsis for this. I guess before we get to the production piece, big picture. What is your overall impression of this, and how, if at all, has it changed from the first time that you originally encountered it?
It's actually one of my favorite Adventures of Superman storylines. Uh, I like it. Part of the appeal for me, and I didn't know this at the time, I'm a big Star Trek fan as well, right? When William Shatner appeared in the second pilot for Star Trek, Where No Man Has Gone Before, his first scene, you watch him, he smiles at Spock, and it's nailed. He's Captain Kirk in that moment, and it never wavers from that first moment we see him on screen. When George Reeves appears as Superman in Superman and the Mole Men, he nails it. He is Superman. I mean, it just blows me away how he could step in, because before that we'd had Kirk Allen in the serials, Ray Middleton at the World's Fair, but he just came in and he looked the part, he acted the part, and he brought the presence that Superman needed to bring. And I was just blown away by it. And I always loved, like, I said I was a Star Trek fan. I always love the allegory stories, the ones that are really trying to comment on something. And Superman and the Mole Men does that. I mean, it's all about the Red Scare and everything else of that era, but it's done in this sci-fi story, and really a true sci-fi story. Yes, the show did do more of those, but this one really is sci-fi. And and it works. Yeah, it's for kids, and they're, what's Lois's line at the end, kind of dopey, right? And they're like, I guess they're saying you live your life and we'll live ours, and it's like, yeah, all right, whatever. So it's a little heavy-handed, but it nails that character just beautifully, and the relationship with Clark and Lois, and Superman and Lois. When she sees Superman for the first time, her face just lights up. But she goes, Superman, and she's just, it projects what it needs to project for a first, for an introduction of the character under this actor's aegis.
I agree with all of that. But it's funny, on the note of Lois, she's right on board there with the mob. Right up until Superman shows up, right? She's not really picking up what Clark is putting down about, hey, we have to take a beat, calm down, everyone. We have to be careful. I'll handle this. Nah, she wants nothing to do with that. As soon as Superman shows up, it's like, oh, we have to protect these beings from below.
Yeah, she's Two-Faced now that you mention it. Yeah.
I didn't love that about her in this. I felt like,
she was also, let's face it, she was also kind of winchy to Clark a lot of the times. Like, he's always doing that. He's been the toughest guy in the story so far next to Superman. What are you talking about?
Yes, but no, I echo everything you said about the presence. And again, look, we spent a few minutes talking about how definitive this and formative this depiction of Superman was for so many people who grew up watching it. And I think even just looking at Superman and the Mole Men as an encapsulation of what George Reeves could do as Superman, he brought so much to it. And presence is the absolute perfect word. I've said this multiple times, and again, I don't always mean to beat up on poor Kirk Allen, but having recently watched those serials, it's right there on the screen. It's the sort of thing, it's not something you can write. It's not something you can direct. It's just when the two of them are standing there in their costumes, it's just one of them feels like a dude in a costume and one of them feels like Superman, and it's Reeves as Superman. And it's just that presence.
Well, that's the thing. And it's like, I'm jumping way ahead, has nothing to do with George Reeves, but in Christopher Reeve, right? And I may have mentioned this to you once before when we've spoken. My favorite scene of all really is the Superman 2 scene where he catches the elevator that's falling with Lois underneath it. And he just looks at her and goes, I believe this is your floor, and smiles. And that's the presence. That's embodying who Superman is, the way that Reeves does in Superman and the Mole Men. And to me, that just blows me away. It's like, how does an actor just nail it like that? And he does.
Yeah. And no, there is a very, very strong message here. And I think in terms of what both Clark and Superman say and do in this story, it really tells you, I think, everything you need to know about Superman, and is a very aspirational take. And I think was great to show to an audience, and especially an audience of kids, but kind of how this came to be. So I'm sure we at least touched on this when we did our discussion of the first episode that aired, Superman on Earth, when we began our season 1 coverage. But we'll circle back to this idea that as the Superman radio program was coming to an end, DC wanted to exploit the character in this new medium of television. So they tapped Bob Maxwell, the producer of the radio show, to develop a television series. And if any of this doesn't line up with your understanding, please jump in and correct me, Ed. But
no worries. All good.
So they produced these 26, or Superman and the Mole Men, an hour-long theatrical feature that they would then use to sell the entire season, which included that and then the remaining 24 episodes. And they filmed all of these in the summer and fall of 1951, starting with Superman and the Mole Men in July 1951, and then it hit theaters that fall, I believe, November 1951. And again, was meant to sell this series. But of course, it took a while to find Kellogg's as the sponsor. And then even once Kellogg's came on board, they wanted certain aspects of episodes changed to make them a little bit more family friendly. And so it wasn't until fall of 1952 when the show actually started airing on television. And it's a little bit nebulous as far as, again, I think the intention always was to take this hour-long Superman and the Mole Men theatrical feature and re-edit it into a 2-parter for the main series. But it's a little nebulous to me, at least the research that I did, about when it actually aired as episodes.
Not until 61.
That's the thing, because you look on IMDb and it has August 10th, 1953 listed, but that's not.
That's not right.
That's not right. I didn't think so. But
my understanding is because of the actor's contract. Look, everything was about money, right? Although I want to address that because there's something positive to say about everything being about money. Uh, but they would have to have paid the actors more money because it was theatrically released. So it had to wait until a certain point where that part of the contract lapsed. Then it could become part of the series. But until 1961, it was not seen on television. It was just Superman and the Mole Men, as a thing. I don't know if I should go off on this slight thing about, but what I find so, DC and National could take a lot of stuff between all that stuff with Siegel and Schuster and all that stuff that went down between the two of them and them. And without a corporation behind them, without a Warner Brothers behind them, they nonetheless financed this movie and these 24 half-hour shows, not knowing they would ever get on the air. That shows, and a lot of things they did up until this point is they were all about nurturing Superman. They were all about making sure that this character was presented in the best light possible, whether it was the radio show, the animated shorts, the Fleischer animated shorts, even the serial to some degree. I mean, again, that has its issues. But when it came to this show, what a leap of faith for a company that wasn't this multi-billion-dollar company that it is now.
No, that's a phenomenal point. When I first started delving into Adventures of Superman a few years ago now, I was floored by that because
Yeah.
it's so it's one thing to have just done Superman in the Mole Men or to have just done a pilot and then you try to sell that, right? But to fully produce an entire season of television, hoping that you'll find a sponsor and getting it on the air is really something. And Superman in the Mole Men does have quite the distinction. It is the first theatrical feature film featuring Superman, right? Of course, he had been on the big screen in the Fleischer animated theatrical shorts, and then like we've been talking about the live action Kirk Allen movie serials, but those were serials, not a feature. So this has a distinction. I mean, it's when you talk about overlooked entries in the Superman world, whenever you see rankings of movies and things like that, rarely do I see this even really pop up, but it is part of it.
People don't think of it as a movie; they think of it as The Unknown People. That's the thing. They don't think of it as Superman and the Mole Men, this movie that was released.
Yes.
I think that's the difference. And DC also, or National rather, they were hoping the movie would recoup some of the costs. That was part of it too, not only selling the series, but to recoup some of the costs by having a theatrical release.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't know how much they recouped, but that was the intent. So.
And it was written by Richard Fielding, aka Bob Maxwell and Whitney Ellsworth. That was their their pen name, which in a previous episode, Richard Fielding had been listed. I didn't clock what that was really all about, but now I realize. And directed by Lee Sholem.
Yeah.
So I guess a couple of things. Now, you and I both watched in preparation for this, or rewatched both the theatrical feature version and the 2-part television version, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right. Which was very kind of you. I just so the audience knows, I didn't force Ed to do that. I was like, you just pick one, but I appreciate
you don't pull guns on people and make them do anything, right? I mean, it's what's so funny though? I went to the season 1 disc of Adventures of Superman, saw Superman and the Mole Men, put on The Unknown People Part 1. There was no sound. I couldn't believe it. I had to go buy it for $1.99 on Amazon. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask for a refund, but but I couldn't believe it. But yes, I checked out both basically. They're pretty close. I mean,
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. There certainly are distinctions and we'll talk about them, but I'm trying to think. I'm almost positive this is the first time I had ever watched the theatrical version. I think previously I had only ever seen the 2-part television version. So I wanted to see that. And, a lot of these episodes I do watch twice anyway in advance of recording. So this was a way to do that, but have it, mix it up a little bit where it's mostly the same, but a little bit different. And that gave me something to look for as I was rewatching. Do you think this makes a better Superman movie? This story makes a better Superman movie or a better 2-part episode?
I prefer to, now granted, now we can watch it one after the other. So it's like watching it as a movie. I like the movie version. I like Superman and the Mole Men. I also liked, there's that one wonderful tracking shot where Superman flies over the mob, right? In the original version, it's got some generic music playing, which is fine. But this one, it's like, dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, as he's swooshing over them now. It's like the dramatic TV version, whereas the movie was a little more subtle. I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I think my preference is just to watch it as one one movie. Yeah.
Gotcha. I don't know. I think for me, I probably lean the other way. I
Mhm.
think that again, they're not vastly different, but there were certain cuts made for the TV version, and I feel like they tightened it up a bit. I mean, they had to
Mm,
for the time constraints that they had, but
sure.
I feel like picking up the pace a little bit served the story well.
Hmm.
And also too, it might be, and as far as just even just again having the television show intro and having the music that we're so
There
familiar
is
with,
that. Yeah.
but that I think that's might be a function too of the fact that I've just watched 24 of these, right? So I mean, I'm in that mode, and I think
Yeah.
maybe more that's kind of what I was looking for. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly value in both. But going back to what you were saying before, this was the thing that I kept thinking as I was watching this, that it's a great story, but when you compare it to the rest of season one of Adventures of Superman, it is such an outlier, right?
Oh,
It's not it's
nothing connected to it. Yeah.
like it's not a representation, and that's the thing where we talk about to kind of help sell the show, but it's like it's so different than the rest of the
Yeah.
there's no Metropolis, there's no Perry, there's no Jimmy, but and I think most of all, to your earlier point, it really is this sci-fi story with these subterranean beings who
Right.
come up from below. You look at the rest of season one, and like we said before, they're all these they're crime dramas, right? They're gangsters and bad guys. The most
Superman on
outlandish.
Earth is the one where you get sci-fi with Krypton
Yeah,
exploding, right? And that's it. But yeah.
that's it. I mean, I feel like beyond that, the most outlandish you get is the mind machine, where it's a little. You have to suspend your disbelief, right? That this device can reach across distances and
Yeah.
reprogram people's minds. But even that, it's like okay, there's at least a basis
Sure.
in science. You can kind of go along with it.
No, this is sci-fi. I mean, there's no question. This is sci-fi,
Yeah,
and solid sci-fi for the time, I think.
yeah. But
You
no,
know.
I mean, but that's the thing. I just kept coming back to. It's like it was a bold choice. It was a bold
Yeah.
strategy. I feel like to pick something that really is not so much. I mean, in terms of, I mean, on the other hand, I'll say this as a representation of how we're going to depict Lois Lane, Clark Kent, and Superman, how we're
Yeah.
going to bring Superman to life and visualize his powers on screen and all that. In that sense, I think, yes, it really conveys what we're going to see in the show.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, do you think it was a good choice to have this as the movie?
I mean, when it was part of the series, I didn't notice the difference. You know what I mean? Because I was watching reruns, right? And I was only 5 or 6 or whenever it was I was watching these. So I didn't notice. But when I watch it, like I said, I prefer the movie version anyway. And I think part of that is because I do view it as a movie, even though it's a 57-minute movie. It's a short movie. But I view it as a movie rather than necessarily 2 episodes of the TV series, even though that's the common way to watch it. That's why I think I prefer it that way, though, because it is its own thing in a lot of ways. When you compare it to the show, it's just, yeah, it's like worlds apart from each other. It's just, yeah, I do. I think it works on its own terms, basically. And it works as part of the series, but it is very different. And I'm rambling now, so I'll shut up. Go ahead.
No, no, no. No, that's a great point. No, I think I'm going to swing back around. I know I said I preferred the TV version, but no, I think you made kind of the best argument for viewing this really as a movie because yeah, again, it does feel a little bit out of place as 2 episodes of season one of the show, but I think
Yeah.
looking at it more in its own space as that movie, just to kind of set it apart a little bit more, I think that's a more appropriate place for it. So
It's
no,
almost easier to go from the movie to the series than from the series in general to this sci-fi story at the end of the season, really, because it doesn't fit with the rest of the season. But you could easily go from that. And, you asked if it works better. It's like what it reminded me of is because it is so different from the show. I don't know if this is a good comparison or not. Is I get all these great Indiana Jones movies, and what does George Lucas do? He makes the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and you watch it, and you're like, where's Indiana Jones? That's not what I saw on the big screen. Kind of reminds me of that. It's like, here's the sci-fi Superman, and you get to the show. It's like, wait a minute, where's that guy? But it works, obviously. But
yeah, it works, but no, I think you're probably right, and I think maybe starting with Superman and the Mole Men, yeah, maybe probably would be an easier transition as opposed to watching 24, regular season one
crime
episodes.
dramas that become the sci-fi story, right?
Yeah,
So,
again, it's interesting too. Again, just in terms of them choosing to start with this, they don't do the origin, right? They do give you that little that little narration at the beginning, right, of
Right.
the movie, sort of a proto version of what we would get on the television series. It's not as dynamic or polished as
Oh
we'll
no,
get on
and
the
the
show.
theme is just like a regular sci-fi movie theme rather than the Superman theme.
Yeah, so that little or prologue explaining his origin, that's obviously specific to the movie. When it was re-edited as episodes of the television show, of course, it used the score from the show, so the music was different. And again, other than that, there were definitely cuts here and there. I think the sequence where the mob is chasing one of the beings, I think that got trimmed a bit for the television version.
Yeah.
There were at
Yeah.
least a couple of other things. There was a scene early on when Corrigan, who's the foreman of the mine, or the head,
Yeah, I think that's a good description of him. Yeah.
the man on the ground, and then he's talking with one of the other guys, Pop Shannon, and there was an exchange between the two of them before Lois and Clark show up. That was in the theatrical version. That was not
Yeah,
there.
because they said, "Hey, there's a car coming this way or a dot coming this way," and then they were still talking while the car took a while to get there. In this version, the TV version, they're there. I mean, there's a car, a dot coming, and all of a sudden the car is pulling up. So
I think too there was, and it's funny now. My memory is betraying me. And I'm like, am I just imagining some of these differences? But I feel like in the movie version too, a little bit later on, there was a longer discussion among Superman, Lois, Corrigan, and Craig, the PR guy, about how you can't report on the story. This will cause mass panic. We have to keep this contained.
right.
And I don't think that's in the TV version.
That's a good point. You know what? The problem of watching them back to back is it blends together, so it's a little tough for me anyway to separate it. But yeah, there was that whole talk about it. And what will we get if you report this? You're going to get headlines. You're going to get people screaming and panic, and the military or whatever the heck he said. Yeah, that would explode. Basically, the news would explode.
Were there
So.
any other differences that you clocked?
Boy, that's tough. I should have been better prepared for this, to tell you the truth, because
That's
again, I
quite all
watched
right.
them back to back, and it is kind of blending together. So I've let you down, Anthony. I'm
No, you
sorry.
haven't. It's quite all right. I think
Okay.
just from reading trivia, I think one of the things they said was cut for the TV show was references to the beings as aliens, but I don't feel like there was a ton of that in the movie, unless I'm
No,
just,
mole men, not as aliens, but
yeah.
as mole men. They referred to them as mole men in the movie, but not in the series.
Okay. Do they
I
say it a
think
lot?
a
I
couple
mean,
of times, not a
yeah,
lot, but
all
a
right.
couple of times. I think my memory of you know.
So yeah, so again, they're not vastly different. I mean, if there are other alterations that we're missing, feel free to let us know. But
Yeah,
yeah, those were sort of the big picture differences between the two.
yeah,
So typically what we do with these episodes, we'll kind of do scene by scene. We can jump around a little bit more. I don't feel like we need to adhere so strictly to this, uh, so we can see where the conversation takes us. We'll also do
sure.
just a quick guest star rundown. So a couple of familiar faces here. So we had Stanley Andrews as the sheriff. And he was just in, for us covering it on the podcast, he was just in the Ghost Wolf episode. He was the foreman at the timber company. So we just saw him very recently towards the end of season 1. J. Farrell McDonald as Pop Shannon. He's the first one we see succumb to a heart attack and die from
Right.
fright upon seeing the mole men. I recognized him from It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes, you're crazy drunk fool. You ran over my tree.
Oh, I was so happy to see him. He was just enjoying his oranges here. But yeah, I always think of him as the curmudgeon who's upset with George Bailey for driving into his tree. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, I was so happy to see that, and I'm glad you were right there with me on that.
I didn't
Uh,
even realize it till today watching it. I was like, oh my God, it's, George Bailey killed his tree.
yeah, 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 yeah. The voice. It was the voice.
Yeah,
Instantly, I was like, oh,
exactly.
that's the guy. Yeah, I
Yep.
love it. Ah, so good. And then we had Walter Reed as Corrigan. He'll come back in season 6 of Adventures of Superman as another character, obviously. Jeff Corey as Luke Benson, and Ray Walker as Craig, the PR guy. Those are our main guest stars. On the guest star front, is there anyone else you recognized, or anything these people that you know these other people from, or anything of note that
Not
you
really.
came
I
to
mean,
mind?
honestly, a lot of day players basically that I didn't really stick out with me. I mean, obviously Jeff Corey is has been around forever, and uh, no, Pop, the actor already, I forgot his name. But no, outside of that, I didn't really look at anybody and sit there and go, oh, I know this one from this. You know, it wasn't like that. I think I was more focused on, oh, I love, Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane. She's like one of my favorites. Oh, there's George Reeves as Superman, so I was a little focused on that, I guess. But it was fun watching it. So.
Man, and it's appropriate. This is like the end of season 1. You and I have talked about this off mic, but I know you and I are both big fans of Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane. Yeah. I have to tell you now, this is our 25th episode. In every instance where it's come up in conversation with a guest, everyone who has expressed an opinion has expressed a preference for Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane.
She's
on
great.
This podcast.
She nails it. I mean, she brings that no-nonsense approach to, the other Lois, Noel Neal's Lois, she's a nice lady, but I don't really hit her as this hard-hitting reporter, whereas Phyllis Coates, I do. And she'll call Superman or Clark, not Superman, but she'll call Clark out on his crap, basically. And I don't see Noel Neal really doing that.
I know. It's funny because obviously this was the first thing filmed, but it's the last thing that we're watching here. So this is our last time with Phyllis Coates as Lois. And it's very bittersweet. And it's not a knock against Noel Neal, but yeah, I think I don't know, it might take a minute to kind of adjust to that as we get into season 2.
Well, what's interesting, though, is I forget who said it, like in an interview for the book, but the idea was that Phyllis would have had a harder time adapting to the lighter approach taken with the show, whereas Noel probably could have done the more serious one, but Phyllis definitely would not have been able to handle the lighter approach to the show as it went on, and
that's probably fair. That's probably fair. That's also another aspect I'm not super excited for as we move forward.
It's you know what? It changes, and I know why they had to change it, but they took it to such an extreme as the show goes on. And obviously, this is a whole tangent, but the show gets so silly in a lot of ways. The more it goes on, the criminals become worse, the stories become weaker. I mean, you get some gems in there, don't get me wrong. But overall, it just doesn't have the strength that the first season, part of the second season did too, but especially the first season had. So
when we get there, this is my promise to myself and the audience. I'm just going to have fun with the silly episodes.
Sure.
I'm not going to look famous last words.
Yeah. Right. Let's see how long that lasts. Right.
But you know what it is? Because I think we all recognize what they are. And so I don't know how worthwhile it will be to come on and try to pick them apart and all of that.
5 seasons worth of shows? I don't think so. You know what I mean? It's like that get boring and tiresome after a while. So just go with the flow.
So I think we'll just have fun with those episodes. We'll recognize they're a different kind of Superman show. We'll look for those gems. We'll look for those scenes that call to mind the greatness of what this can be. We'll continue to enjoy the performance of George Reeves, and we'll just have fun with it when the time comes. So that's the plan. We'll see what happens when we ultimately get there. I got this while we're talking Phyllis Coates and Lois. Yeah, I mean, she's so tough as always and mixes it up. I mean, she hits Luke Benson.
Oh yeah,
when they have that later standoff outside the hospital.
You coward, you filthy coward, and she hits him. That's great.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely fantastic. And the one other thing that I did want to talk about, I mean, we could talk about it more specifically when we get into the actual scenes, but one of the things that I thought actually worked better here than in a lot of the rest of the first season was when Clark ducks away and Lois makes her remarks about him.
Yeah.
I felt like that lent itself well to this general view that she and other characters seem to have of Clark. It's still difficult to reconcile, as we always talk about, right? Because Clark is so tough and he's so capable and he's
confident. Not a coward at all in this stuff. That's the problem. He's not playing that cowardice aspect of the character at all.
Very, very much so. And like I've talked about in other episodes, there are so many times where there are characters, Lois most of all, but sometimes Perry as well, they'll kind of put Clark down, yet he's always the first one that they call for. So it's like, which one is it?
Yeah.
All that being said, what I appreciated here was, again, there were a couple of instances when Clark tries to get the mob to stand down and they're not hearing it. And then they all go off when they hear the scream, right, of the mother in the house. And Clark runs away. Right, one instance there, and then again outside the hospital when Clark has to leave so he can, change into Superman. And Lois has that line where she's like, "He's scared to death. It's pitiful."
Right.
And it's a great line, but I just like, okay, so you do see these moments where to the outside observer, or to Lois in particular in this case, it's like it looks like he's running away. It looks like things didn't break the way he wanted them to, right?
Right.
And things are about to get more dangerous, and he's ducking out. Like that's what it looks like. So those couple of scenes went a long way towards like, okay, when we see all these other instances where they're making these remarks about him and things like that, it's still tough because his Kent is so tough, but I can get on board with it a little bit more.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. It just is hard to reconcile certain aspects of it, though, because of the fact he is there standing up front speaking what should be spoken. Even, I mean, Superman does it more, but as Clark is definitely speaking the right words, showing that he's got strength, whereas a lot of people are afraid to stand up to Benson and that kind of thing. So, but I understand what you're saying. It does look, it that's the relationship one way or the other, whether he comes across as tough or not. The Lois Clark relationship in that era, especially before it got romantic, was that you coward? All right. Oh, Superman, how are you?
Exactly. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we return, we'll get into our scene by scene breakdown. We'll be right back. And we're back. All right. So this story kicks off with the dismantling of this oil well and all of this equipment being gathered up and buried, all of this state of the art, brand new, unused equipment. So all of the workers are, a little bit miffed as to why this is happening. But Corrigan is just like, listen, I'm the one responsible for this. Like, just do what you're told.
Right.
So already, right? And we even had the sign as you're heading into town, home of the world's, deepest or largest oil well. So we already have this mystery building of like, why would something like this be dismantled? And then, like we talked about before, we have the arrival of Lois and Clark. And again, just going back to this being the first that anyone saw of what would become Adventures of Superman, we don't do the origin, right? I mean, we'll eventually
Not
get
at
the
all.
Superman on Earth, but yeah, it's just right into it. Which, do you think that's in any way due to the fact that the Kirk Allen serials had done the origin? Like, do you think that would have felt kind of like I have been there, done that on the big screen?
I think it's a combination of things. If you consider that Kirk Allen had done that, the radio show had done it, the Fleischer cartoons did it, not the origin, but the opening, that whole opening narration of it. To me, it feels like it's kind of like what they did with Tom Holland as Spider-Man, right? We skip the origin. We know he's been Spider-Man. We know why he's Spider-Man and how he became Spider-Man without seeing it. In this case, do we really need to see? It's kind of like why I'm grateful James Gunn's not doing an origin story with Legacy, because we do not need to see Krypton blow up one more time. We all know that's how Superman got here. And I think even back then, Superman was such a phenomenon and people were so aware. The newspaper strip, the origin was very well established, I think, by 1951. So, just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't. That's one thing I don't look at this and long to have seen the origin depicted in this. It's like, no, I think it was cool to just jump right into it, and they're already established as working together, and they have their dynamic, and we're just into it. So no,
Right.
I think that was a good choice for this. And they're being brought over there by Craig. He's the publicity guy, and he hasn't been told about the dismantling of the operation, so he's put off. And Lois and Clark meet Corrigan, and they try to get some information out of him, but Corrigan's very standoffish, basically like it's none of your business. I think all he is willing to share is how deep they ultimately
Yeah.
were able to drill. And I have no frame. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to this. I have no frame of reference. So the 6 miles below, it's
Okay.
sure. I don't know.
You say so. Okay. It's the center of the earth. Okie dokie. I have no idea.
Yeah. So, Craig is like, oh, we'll put you up at the hotel in town on the company's expense, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry you didn't get your story. And Clark's not ready to give up. He's like, oh, well, there might be a story here. So he clearly knows there's more going on.
Right.
Anything else from that opening scene that stood out to you?
No, just that I think it very effortlessly captures the relationship between Lois and Clark. I mean, you know what I mean? The back and forth a little bit. Not necessarily the coward thing she'll call him later on, but just really, again, it's that introducing these characters for the first time, and you believe you're looking at Lois Lane, you believe you're looking at Clark Kent, and that's a big deal, I think.
It is. That's the thing too. You have to give the two of them so much credit because they just slip into those characters from the jump. They
There's a
feel
rapport between them. You feel like they know each other.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry to jump in, but yeah.
No. I agree totally. So yeah, it's such a strong start for the two of them as Lois and Clark, and you see that even more so in the next scene where we catch up with them in the hotel lobby at night, and Clark's down there, and then Lois comes in, and they have their back and forth. What I liked about this was, I feel like even just in this one scene, you got a lot of the different flavors of their dynamic. So they regard each other as peers with respect. But there's also, Clark decides he's going to go, take a ride back out there to kind of see
she's
what's
going to
going
go
on,
with.
and she's going to go with him. So you have that. So you got. I feel like that scene kind of encapsulated a lot of what we'll see of, again, absent the whole cowardice bit. But
Yeah, and Lois also is not going to let Clark get the story. If there's a story to be had, she is going to be part of it, or she's going to take the lead on it, one or the other. So if there's even a hint that there's a story that Clark could find out there, she's certainly not going to let him go and do it.
And meanwhile, poor Pop Shannon has met his end while he's trying to enjoy the oranges that, right, Craig had brought him the oranges.
Yeah.
We as he's enjoying his oranges, we see two of these beings. Do you think of them as mole men? Do you think of them as unknown people? Do you think of them by some other designation? How do you refer to them in your head?
I think of them as mole men because that's what they were originally, and when they come out, and even again, it's so funny because I've never really thought about what I considered them until like you're asking me, and having just seen the movie and the 2-part episode, I think mole men sounds good for what they are. I mean, I didn't know that was hair all over them. I just thought they were wearing furry clothes or something. It didn't exactly look like hair, and bald caps. But I did think of them as mole men.
Is there, and again, maybe this is silly, but is there, because obviously they don't call them mole men, right, in the TV version, and it's called the unknown people. Is there derogatory association with that term, or I mean, why do you think they changed that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, it was that'd be an interesting thing to look up though. Maybe mole men was sort of a derogatory term, and they wanted to clean it up for TV. This is my way of saying I don't know, but it's an intriguing question. I don't have an answer for it.
I know, because as I was preparing to talk about this, I'm like, should I not say mole man? I mean, like, that's the title. I'm not aware of.
Do you believe Anthony said mole man on the air?
Yeah,
I can't believe.
But as far as the title, though, I meant to say this earlier. What's very cool and interesting, and it clearly makes sense when you watch the story unfold. It's not called Superman versus the Mole Men. It's not called Superman versus the unknown people, right? It's Superman and the Mole Men, right? Because they're not the antagonist in this story. It's the human mob that Superman ultimately has to fight, and not even physically, right? It's not so much that they're a physical challenge to him, but it's more changing the hearts and minds. It's really fairly sophisticated, I feel like, for what you would expect of something of the time.
What I found so interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we do the scene by scene, is the way that Superman responds to the gang and referring to them as Nazi stormtroopers and that sort of thing, and the gentleness in which he speaks to the Mole Men.
Yes.
We're not going to harm you. We will not harm. You know what I mean? It just such an interesting contrast, because you are seeing those two sides of Superman, but instead of Superman confronting an enemy with the tough bravado, he's confronting the humans who are acting like fools and being totally gentle with the aliens. So I found that interesting.
And going back to what you were saying before, what you heard from folks in your interviews about how there was this real paternal view of the George Reeves depiction of Superman, you especially, and this is not the only instance, other times throughout the show, and even just in season one, it's not a ton of instances of this in season one, but whenever he's interacting with a child, in particular a younger person, you really see that nurturing, compassionate side, because he, again, for the most part, when he's mixing it up with the bad guys, he's just tough and kicking their asses. But when you see him have those moments to show compassion towards a younger person or child, it comes right across. So for the folks you interviewed who had that view of him, you could definitely see in part where it comes from.
And you know what I hadn't thought of till you just brought it up is when he has those interactions and he gives that reassuring smile, because he has a very good smile, George Reeves does. It does remind me of that Christopher Reeve thing I said. I believe this is your floor. When he's talking to a child, he lights up his face just being a totally benevolent person. Uh, there's something just so charming that does suck you into his portrayal in those moments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So by the time Lois and Clark make it back out to this oil drilling operation, poor Pop has seen the mole men in the window and has suffered a heart attack brought about by fright and has expired. I felt like, I don't mean to pick on Lois. I know she's seen some things, but I felt like she was like awfully nonchalant about this dead body on the ground. No?
Yeah. Yeah. And also her reaction, even though I understand she'd scream, but she was like, what should have kicked in with Lois is she sees these guys in the window. Sure, scream. I get it. Startled you. But right away after that, what are they? Who are they? I want to know what this is. What's going on here? The investigative reporter, as tough as Lois Lane is, that's what we should have seen kick in. And maybe I'm putting too much on this 1951 movie, but that's what I thought would have been cooler to see Lois get over the initial shock and fear and suddenly become the reporter.
Yes. I know. That would have been cool. I know.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't want to say we're being greedy, but it's like when you think about how ahead of its time the show was in its depiction of Lois. I mean, how ahead of her time
Yeah.
Lois was as a character generally.
Absolutely.
But in particular,
Until
in
the
the
50s.
context, yeah, I know. But especially in this show and in this first season, the Phyllis Coates version, she was so ahead of her time. So it's like now it's like we want even more. But no, I agree with you. I think it would have been cool to see more of that side come out. But in any event, they call in the coroner and Corrigan's there and Craig is there and they all leave except Corrigan, and Clark stays behind. And I love the swagger with which Reeves played Clark in that scene where after everyone clears out and Corrigan's like lighting up a cigarette, Clark's like, you know why I stayed behind, right?
Yeah.
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 He's like, you wouldn't tell me before, but now Pop Shannon is dead. He's like, come on, what's the deal here? What's going on?
Right.
I love the vibe of that scene, and then the subsequent scene where Corrigan lays everything out and explains they've been digging deeper and deeper, and he's been examining the substances that he's been finding on the drill, and turns out the lights, and you see that they're glowing, that they presumably have radium. It could be harmless phosphorescence, which Clark posits, and that ends up being true. We find out at the end of the episode, but the belief, the theory, the fear at this point is that whatever they're finding below is radioactive and deadly to humans. And they also take a look at the microscope and they see living organisms. So now, all of the pieces are kind of starting to fit together where, okay, there's life down below, contrary to what they had previously believed. And so now these beings that are being seen in town that Lois described, it kind of lines up with this whole idea of, oh, there might really be some sort of species down there.
Right. Absolutely. And it's fascinating because again, we're getting more into that sci-fi element of the movie, where it's like, okay, not only have you got these little guys, but you got now this whole idea of what else is down there. What are these microbes? You know what I mean? What does it mean exactly? So it's intriguing stuff.
Yeah. And then we head back to the hotel lobby where Luke Benson now has started to form his mob, because now there was another instance where I think it was the Undertaker who saw these beings on the road and got spooked and crashed.
Yes.
Right. And then when we catch up with the rest of them at the hotel, there are a couple of other people who have had run-ins with these people, these unknown people, and have essentially injured themselves out of, out of fright. But everybody's getting riled up here. And this is where Clark, a complete outsider, just comes in, tries to get them all to stand down. But I liked, over the course of even just this scene, but even this entire story between Clark and Superman, he makes various appeals to them, right? His initial approach is, hey, like, this could be dangerous. You guys need to wait, right? And then I think the arguments get deeper and more, I don't know, philosophical about this whole idea of, we disturb their world, right? They haven't done anything to us. We must be as unusual to them as they are to us, like that whole bit. But he's really trying his best, and no one, including Lois, is having anything to do with it.
Well, you got to love when Clark says, "Let me handle this." And she looks and she goes, "What are you going to do?" It's like he practically screams, "I'm Superman," like 3 times in this thing, where, you know what I mean? Where it's, she says something and he just suggests that he's Superman without, and then pulls it back. He does it like 2 or 3 times. Finally, she should just look at him and say, "I know you're Superman. Knock it off."
There, yeah. Him saying "Let me handle it" is probably one of my favorite moments of this entire thing.
Yeah,
just like, all right,
it's
buddy.
great.
But yeah, no, to your point, there are a few instances where he has those coy little lines. And one of them, again, this might just be in the theatrical version where there's this discussion of, Lois, you can't report on this. And I think she says like, "Oh, what if Clark's already called the story in?" And Superman's like, "I'm quite sure he hasn't."
Right. Now, wait a minute. How do you know? But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's, for the most part, when it comes to the whole dual identity, we suspend our disbelief. It's par for the course with
this show. You really have to suspend your disbelief because Clark carries himself like Superman without the costume. And I always make the joke that if Clark was on the phone with Inspector Henderson, and if he took off his glasses to clean them or something in the middle of the conversation on the phone, Henderson would go, "When did Superman get on the line?" I mean, there's no differentiate, nothing to delineate the two of them from each other. It's just so funny.
I brought this up in the Czar of the Underworld episode that we did recently, but that's where, Clark and Henderson go out to Hollywood. But then, of course, Superman appears. And at one point, Superman walks into Henderson's hotel room, but Henderson has his back to the door. And Superman starts talking. And I thought it would have been such a great bit if he was like, "Oh, Kent, what are you?" "Oh, Superman." But they
Right.
don't go there.
No, because they had to totally suspend the disbelief. But yeah.
You know what I really appreciate, though, about this? Because I don't love the whole, as much as I do enjoy the Christopher Reeve incarnation, I don't love the whole bumbling Clark masquerade sort of
thing. You don't
thing.
have to do that, though. There's Brandon Routh did sort of a more balanced Clark Kent, I think, between, you know what I mean,
yes.
Without going as extreme as Reeve did.
But so I've so enjoyed the Reeves depiction, and what I think is particularly interesting in what we're talking about here is that he tries to accomplish as much as he can as Clark. Like once all of this starts to unfold, it could just be a job for Superman, right? But he tries to do as much as he can as Clark, which I like. I really like that. I like that Superman isn't the first resort. It's really the last resort. And that holds true for all of these episodes that we're talking about. I mean, they're so Clark or Lois and Clark driven.
Well, it's like Incredible Hulk, right? You bring in like the TV show, The Incredible Hulk. He's Dr. Banner for 90% of the episode, and then he becomes the Hulk for the last, 10 minutes or something. Superman is sort of the same thing on this show in that it's largely Clark, and then when it's absolutely necessary, it becomes Superman.
Yeah. While they're having their powwow in the hotel lobby, the unknown people have entered the home of this family and the room of this little girl, and again, I think there are a lot of sort of well constructed bits here and statements about people and humanity where this child is not frightened at all by these people, right? And welcomes them in, and they're playing catch and all of that. So it's all of these adults who are so quick to be frightened and to want to hunt and resort to violence. So again, I just think, not to harp on this, but yeah, I just feel like it's more going on here than you would expect.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole thing is filled with, messages, some bludgeoned and some subtle, but that is, as I said earlier, the thing that appeals to me is the allegory on all these different levels that the film is depicting, and the innocence of a child not being afraid of what's different and embracing, in fact, what's different, something we grow out of, I guess, oftentimes as we get older. So I know I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah. I guess the reason maybe I'm so struck by it is just that it would have been easy. Like it would have been an easier path, I guess, to have a story about other beings invading a town and Superman has to fight them off or something. But they went for something that was vastly more interesting, and I really commend them for that. So, of course, the mother of this little girl enters the room and just lets out this blood-curdling shriek.
What I love is she walks in looking up, too. Did you notice that? She walks in going, "Ah!" And then she screams, right? But she first walks in like, what the hell are you expecting on the ceiling that you walk into your daughter's room? I don't understand.
Right? Both
That was
times I
weird.
watched it, I was like, what is the deal with that?
Yeah, it just cracked me up when I saw that. It's like, oh boy, what a dramatic shift of eye focus. I always look at the ceiling when I walk into a room. You never know what's up there.
It's like, I guess, they wanted the moment of her looking down and having that realization, but I think they just kind of overshot the mark. She probably should have been looking more
Yeah,
like
look
in
at
the
the
middle of
bed,
the
see
room.
the empty bed, and then shift to the floor where she's there. Her daughter's there with the little aliens or moment. So,
I know. So the mob is off, and then this is where Clark ducks out, and this is the first instance where Lois is like, "Oh, like that didn't go your way, and now
yeah,
you're
right.
running off." But this mob, I mean, they're out for blood. I think my favorite bit is the guy ripping the barber,
I don't
the
know what he was
barber
going to do
shop.
with that, but yeah, that
Yeah,
cracked me up. The barbershop pole, right? The one against the wall. He's like, I got this. Let's go. It's like the guys in Superman 2, right? They beat up Superman. Let's get him. I got a newspaper. Let's go. Go chasing him down with a newspaper. So, very sharp.
yeah. And then look, Superman intervenes, and he gets between the mob and the house, and makes short work of Benson's gun, his rifle in particular.
Yeah.
Quickly bends it. I mean, going back to what I was saying before, maybe a reason why Clark doesn't resort to Superman right away. Superman's presence doesn't seem to sway them much, right? It's only
Even
once
when they've seen him bend the gun and get shot at and just stand there, we're going to lynch you next. You really think so? It's like, I don't understand how it has no impact on them at all. That's so strange.
right? I know.
Hatred just blinds them to what's obvious in front of them, I guess. I don't know.
I will look. I'll make maybe a somewhat controversial argument. Obviously, Luke Benson and the mob, they're our villain of the piece, our antagonist, and eventually, by the time we get to the end, Benson comes around, at least on Superman. I still question what he would do if he saw one of these underground beings.
His coming around would last about 12 minutes and then go back to being Luke Benson. But
yes. So obviously I'm on the side of Superman and not a bloodthirsty mob. But one thing that I did appreciate as I was watching this is that, giving the story and the characters their due, looking at it from the perspective of these townspeople, it's like, it's all these outsiders from their perspective, right? It's the oil company coming in, and one of them, I think Benson makes a remark about that at one point, about all those oil people. So you've got the oil company coming in, you've got Lois and Clark coming in, you've got Superman coming in, you've got these unknown people invading.
right.
And even if maybe people could just kind of relax and not freak out at the first sight of them, people are getting hurt and killed at the sight of these beings. So, to an extent, you do understand where they're coming from. It's not totally irrational. Like, what is the problem? Why are they doing this? Like, you do understand to a point. Obviously, they take it too far. But I appreciated that. It's like, okay, you get what this is all about for them.
But to them, this could have been anything. This could have been any outside force, almost looking for an excuse. They were so quick to round up the dogs and start talking about lynching and have their weapons and all. They hit me as the kind of people that's like, our town is fine, but we're going to do whatever we have to do to protect it from outsiders. And that outsider could have been anything. It didn't have to be a mole man for them they were too quick with the lynchings and everything else to make it feel like this is an isolated incident with these guys.
No, that's a good point. Again, to be clear, I'm not on the side of them, but
no, I'm not saying you are, but no, I just want to say that again, they were too prepared for action.
Yeah, I know those hounds right there. They were ready to go.
Yep, they were. Why don't you just why are you going to burn them in there? Let's let the hounds get them. Oh my God, it's like let the hounds eat them, basically kill them. So anyway,
yeah, and Luke Benson. What is his investment in all of this? I mean, it really is just that angry
redneck attitude, basically. The it's our town and we're going to run it the way we want. He doesn't listen to the sheriff at all.
Punches the sheriff later.
Punches the sheriff, right? It's like, so Luke Benson doesn't care about anything except his own sense of power or something over these people. And then he can whip them all together. They all listen to everything he says. Sounds like a political figure. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, look, that's the thing. You watch this and you think, okay, a lot of this really rings true, sadly, right? It's not like you watch this and you think, gee, people wouldn't do that. You watch it and you think, no, people would exactly do that. I mean, look, I know I'm jumping ahead here, but the scene later outside the hospital where Superman says to them, you've shown you can't be trusted with guns, so I'm going to take them from you.
Right.
fascinating. And we've digging for Kryptonite in particular, we've talked about this whole idea of, if Superman were real, it's like, well, what should he do with his powers? How far should he go? And you think about the George Reeves incarnation of the character in a real world scenario in the world we live in, where we have we've seen the results of gun violence, sadly, far too many times. And it's like this whole idea of like, well, you can't be trusted with this. Like, I'm going to take them. I mean, again, I guess maybe a more grounded version of the Superman 4 rounding up the nuclear weapons bit.
I thought that when actually you can't be trusted. I exactly thought of that scene in Superman 4 where he starts scooping up the nuclear weapons and doing it. I don't know, but I'm not saying Superman should fly all over the world confiscating guns. But in a mob situation where Lois Lane, which we'll get to, almost gets shot, he's going to take those guns. And I wish we'd seen a little more of that, because it cuts, as he starts like wrestling with the guys and throwing them aside. I would like to have seen more of that, but they didn't have the budget. I have to fill it in with my mind.
But I know it was a great scene. But yeah. I mean, earlier in the story where we are, he gets the mob to stand down for the instant, but the dogs have gotten the scent. And then later they'll track down the mole men to the top of that dam, and Superman again arrives and tries to appeal to them. Right, explains that they could be radioactive. Don't shoot them; they could fall into the water, contaminate your water supply. Again, all of these reasons that it's like, you guys need to relax.
Right,
and
they won't listen.
They won't listen. And one of the mob members actually gets a shot off and hits one of the mole men, and then we get
just one of the strangest moments. I have to just go off
where
the two guys, first of all, laid down on the top of the thing so awkwardly. And I know it's the staging or whatever it is. And then the gunshot goes off. You hear this blood-curdling scream. You don't see the mole man's mouth open. You just hear this blood-curdling scream as he falls. Just very strangely staged, all of it. But dramatic.
Yes. And that's when we get to the TV version. That's where we have the break and the to be continued when we're at the dam. But so now, as we're talking about it, we're in the second half of the story, and we get this mid-air catch. Superman catches the mole man as he's falling, and I did pause it, and there's that brief frame where it's clearly animation. Right? Yeah.
And then he's got obviously a dummy in his hands because the thing flops all over the place.
But it's the animation part, of course, calls to mind the Kirk Allen serials, where whenever he flew, it was animation. Of course, that was one of the big innovations and advancements and improvements for the George Reeves show, where you actually saw him flying. That made such a difference.
And seeing him like leap up, I guess pulled up on wires, whatever it was, when he takes off, looked very cool. I know he got injured doing it, and that was the end of that. But it was pretty cool looking, I have to say.
I know, for this brief moment where they were still utilizing that technique. Yeah, it was cool. I mean, look, I'm on board with what they ultimately went with the springboard and the bar that he would swing in on. That's all fine. But yeah, to have these instances in this where he just takes off, while he's standing there with them, that was cool. And the midair save. Look, throughout this entire first season, anytime this has come up, I never had any issue with the limitations of the budget or the technology. Like I'm always appreciative of what they were able to accomplish.
You accept what they could do, right?
Yeah. So, it definitely works. So he catches the one who's been shot and we'll bring him to the hospital. And then we get, again, in the theatrical version, it goes on longer, and the TV version, they trimmed it a bit, but this long chase, right, as the mob and the dogs are going after the other one, the other mole man who had survived, and they ultimately. He ultimately runs into the shed that they barricade him in and set on fire. It was quite the inferno.
This was a kid's movie. It's like shocking. Yeah. Very strange.
Yeah, it was. I know it was very intense. Of course, he's able to make his way out. But just as a side note, at the moment, my mother-in-law is staying with us for a couple of days, and she brought her dog. And her dog, whenever she sees dogs on the television screen, goes nuts. Mm-hmm. And so I was watching this twice last night, and it was late, and she was mostly asleep. And whenever those dogs were barking, I turned the volume down as low as possible because it's like I didn't want her to wake up the whole house barking at the TV. Thankfully, it was fine. But
mine today, I watched them during the day, both of them. Second time he ignored it completely. But the first time it went on, the dogs are barking. He just pops his head up from his pillow and just does one of those. And staring at these dogs, but just watching the TV with these dogs running around. So anyway, more than anybody needed to know, but they are.
But no, look, I mean, as far as all this talk of lynching, of stringing them up, they use that
Yeah.
term as well. Again, lighting them on fire. I mean, it's really, you know, there's, you see the ugliness of humanity on full display throughout this. As far as the mole men or the unknown people themselves, what did you think about the visual representation? Did you like the way they were brought to life? Did you feel it fit in terms of what they were going for in the story?
I recognize the limitations they had with the budget and everything. I mean, again, like you, I'm very appreciative of what they had to work with and all that, especially when you consider the fact that they had a whole TV series behind them that might not have made a dime. Uh, I think the look was okay. What I didn't like was a lot of the staging. Like when the guys are chasing the mole man into the shed, he does that long dramatic pause and he puts his hand on his heart and he's just like, those were the things that kind of bothered me. I thought the acting actually was pretty good, sort of this otherworldly movements they had. I thought that was really interesting. The thing on the dam, like I said, I don't know what they were going for there, but that's I blame more on Lee Sholem than anybody else. It's like, yeah, let's lay down on the top of the dam or whatever. But I think there was an otherworldliness to them that, in a low budget sort of way, that was still conveyed, even though they were limited. Uh, I like the look. I mean, I thought it was actually pretty creative. You know, I mean, maybe so you could have done more with the face, but I say that. But you know what? I never had an issue with that. I always watched the episodes and thought they were creepy and effective for what they were supposed to be.
No, same. I think it works, and again, especially in this context, this idea of they are of Earth, just you
Deep
know,
Earth,
just deep Earth that we've never seen before. So
right?
yeah, no, I thought it worked. I thought they were cute. And there are a number of instances where it's like, oh, like you know, it's again, you feel for them, and that's why,
Well,
of
when
course,
they're playing with the little girl, rolling the ball back and forth, they're so fascinated by her and this little ball and rolling it. And there's an innocence again, the innocence of her accepting them, and the innocence of them experiencing sort of the nicest moment they've had since they came up to the surface.
yes,
You know?
no, absolutely. So I think it's at this point where we actually go to the hospital, and uh, the man in charge, right, wants nothing to do with this patient who's
Yeah.
been brought in, and yeah, it's you know, you feel Clark's frustration in the scene. He even says, he's like, well, you know, this person's injured. It's like you would do more for a dog, like you know, you wouldn't turn a dog away, right? Who were injured. But again, this guy is not hearing any of it, and he's like, you know, I don't want to. By the time I come back in the morning, like I don't want to see anything
There'll
to
be
do with this.
trouble.
Yeah,
He says there'll be trouble if he's still here. Right.
yeah, and the nurse similarly wants no part of this. So
She
yeah,
was terrible. Her acting was awful in that scene. Oh my! Oh, I don't know if you should do that. Oh my God! It just drove me crazy. Anyway, sorry to pick on this
no,
woman. 50 years later or whatever it is, but
no,
you
fair
know,
enough.
70 years later.
So naturally, Clark Kent will assist the surgery.
Of course he
All
will.
right,
He's Clark Kent.
it's Clark Kent.
He's not afraid of the radiation. Good.
What and, he has that great after the head guy leaves, and he's like, the milk, what does he say, the milk of human kindness,
Yes,
sarcastically.
that's a great line though. It's really nice. I mean, that's a really
Yeah,
solid line.
no, that was great. The doctor who agrees to try to get the bullet out, right?
Yeah.
We see him in this scene, and then later on as well. And Clark speaks highly of him later, where he's like, that's a man with courage, right?
Yeah.
And he does have courage, right? He's been told to stand down, but no, he's going to help. They don't give us a lot here with this character, so I'm speculating a little bit. But did you feel like, to me, it didn't feel like his efforts were coming from a place of, I have to help. Like there's a life at stake here, and I
Oh
have to
no, it
protect it.
was
He seemed
much
more
more
curious.
surface. But it was also very surface performance of I'll need help, I'll give it to you. Okay, let's go do it. There was never like I'm dealing with this otherworldly thing. What does it mean? What does it mean to operate on this creature? Yeah, you never got any sense of that. I thought it was a very generic doctor. Like
Yes.
the doctor with a heart of gold. I'm going to do the right thing, but you never got any sense of a real person there. I felt anyway.
No, because even later on when they come out of the surgery, I think he's more fascinated by how similarly the mole man's physiology aligns with
But at least that was
with
a little enthusiasm. That was a
yes.
little, you know what I mean, like fascination. That I liked actually. That was the moment where I did like him. Before that, it was very perfunctory. You know, it's just like let's, you know, okay, let's do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. He came out like, oh, it's amazing. It's like its insides are like ours, and it's got this and that and this. I like that moment actually. That was probably his best moment, I think. But
Yes. And I guess too, all things considered, right? It's all relative. So compared to the rest of this town, this guy's a saint.
that's right. That's
Maybe we're
right.
asking
Nobody
too
else would
much.
have done it.
I
Yeah,
know. Maybe we're asking too much of him.
possibly.
I also love how Clark Kent just, man, it's like he's just forever in that suit. It's like he assisted a surgery with the gown over him, but the full suit underneath didn't take off his jacket.
That's a good point. I didn't even realize that. I didn't realize that.
You might think if you were gonna assist a surgery, maybe you would kick off your jacket, maybe roll up your sleeves a little bit, but it's all
That's a
right.
very good point. Certainly, your jacket would come off. Yeah, if nothing else. What's under your shirt there, Mister Kent? You know. Anyway, good.
Yeah. Well, that's true. He does have that going on,
Yeah.
but yeah, no. So we had that. Then there's a short scene where Benson shows up at the sheriff's station and they have their face off there, and he learns that there was the one mole man survived the gunshot, has been brought to the hospital, and so they head off there, and we get I think that's where we get the scene of him clocking the sheriff later outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get the scene that we've already talked about, but we can talk about it more if there's anything we didn't get into yet, where we have the mob outside the hospital with just Superman standing between them. I guess previous to that, Lois and the others had come inside, and now we're outside with with the mob, and again, this is where he compares them to Nazi stormtroopers.
Yeah. Which back then, that's 1951. So that's really close to World War II. I mean, so I'm sure that had a heavy uh, that's a heavy moment when you hear that because it's so close, I think. Although the audience might have applauded, who knows at the time, you know. But you get that, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but it is that scene where somebody takes a shot and almost gets Lois.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of my favorite scenes of the thing. He doesn't flinch. He pushes her aside right before the bullet hits the glass, which is very cool, and says, "Get inside." Right? And whoever shot that gun, you know, that's where he says, "I'm going to take them away from you." It is to me, is such a strong Superman moment. And I love the fact that I don't know why, but the fact that he saved Lois that way just by pushing her aside and then the bullet hits. I just thought that was a cool Superman moment, if nothing else.
Yes. No, it was terrific. I mean, we're nearing the end here, but throughout this episode, I think to see Superman stand up for the other, the outsider, right, and to articulate his position as far as, again, we invaded their world, we must be as strange to them as they are to us. They've done nothing to harm us. Even going back to that lobby scene as Clark, you see the townspeople who've been injured after seeing them. It's like, don't you see? Like this all happened because you were afraid.
Right.
So to see Clark and Superman defend the mole men and articulate these arguments. I have to imagine, especially for young people who are watching this, I would have to imagine that this I would hope that it would have have an impact.
Yeah.
And certainly convey who this character. We always talk about Superman is for everyone, I think this whole story just beautifully encapsulates that.
Well, it's also interesting in that I don't think by that time in the character's history they had really locked down on the notion that Superman is who he is because of the way he was raised by Jonathan and Martha. I don't think it had done by 1950 that where it became much later on, it became like that's their moral in what they encoded in him, moral wise, is what makes him the man he is. Mm-hmm. And yet in this movie, you do get a sense of the morality of Superman. I mean, of not just the guy who has superpowers is going to kick your ass if you don't do the right thing, but he does have a worldview that is so obviously different from the mob, from so many people. And I found that intriguing for so early in the character's history to get that sense rather than him just being the guy stopping, in the early comics, right? Like wife beaters and slumlords and things like that. Somebody who was already stepping into that role as the most human among us, basically.
Yes.
So.
Beautifully said. So again, we already talked about how he disarms the crowd, and yes, we fade away from that scene fairly quickly. But clearly, again, from a physical standpoint, these people are not posing any real threat to him. But for him to go that far to be like, no, I'm taking your guns. Again, especially just in light of where we are in the world today, was particularly fascinating to see that scene and to wonder what the George Reeves Superman would do in today's world.
Oh yeah. So. Absolutely. He's definitely be tougher than a lot of the other ones that way. I mean, and of course, in today's effects, of course, he would have zipped around that crowd at super speed, crushing those guns, and they'd be popping and exploding and stuff as he'd be grabbing them and smashing them. But anyway,
he walks slowly through the crowd.
He does. He just takes them one at a time, basically. Yep.
Yeah. No, it was great though. And then meanwhile, the surviving mole man made his way back down, and now he's emerged with two others with this weapon. What did you think of this device that they brought back with them?
I always thought, even as a kid, I always thought it was cool looking, like a cool sci-fi weapon, and was shocked to discover it was an electrosucks, I think, or whatever it is, a vacuum cleaner, which just had a few additions put onto it, but basically it's a vacuum cleaner. But it looked pretty cool. I mean, the effect itself of blasting was really not very good, but I guess for its time it's okay. But the weapon itself was pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah, I feel like it holds up. And we get this scene there where one of the mob members sees them in the street, goes and tells Luke. Luke goes off, and they blast him with this gun, and he's pinned against the wall, and he's clearly in pain. And then Superman arrives and intervenes and places himself in between this weapon and Luke Benson, right? The chief antagonist of our story here. And clearly that has an effect on Luke Benson. Like we said, I don't know that he's really had a true change of heart, a true come to Jesus moment, but
momentary.
But at least for the moment, if nothing else, because he explicitly says it, he says to Superman, he's like, "You saved me," right? Like this, and the implication, of course, like after everything I've done, you still save me. And that, that's the other thing too, when we talk about what Superman and the Mole Men says about Superman and what it conveys. It's like, yes, it's that he stands up for, for the oppressed, but he stands up for the outsider, stands up for someone who's being bullied, being persecuted. But he also values all life. So even those who have gone against him, right, he will still protect and defend. And I think that was such an important moment too. And this is where, again, just like, I don't know if this was in the script, in the direction, or a choice by George Reeves, but when Benson is like, you saved me, Superman doesn't even look at him, but he's like, it's more than you deserve. But he doesn't turn to look at him. It's
great,
so good.
It really was. Because it's like, look, you don't deserve this, but I'm not going to let you die. I mean, it's not what I do. It was great. It's more than you deserve. And he just walks straight ahead towards the Mole Men and leaves it. Well, I don't get one thing about that scene though, by the way, when Luke does decide to confront them, he tells everybody else, all right, wait here. Why? You brought them everywhere else. You went to the bathroom before. You had them all pile into the bed. No, I'm just kidding. But, it was kind of like that. It's like he brought them everywhere. Suddenly it's like, all right, you stay here and I'm going to take care of this by myself. 3 of them, not 1, 3 of them. And he's going to leave the mob behind. I didn't understand that. It was very odd to me.
Yeah, that was, I'm assuming it was, they were filming that confrontation on a different day and they couldn't have everybody there. But it's in terms of the story, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, why? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I know. I thought the same thing.
Why is there no mob mentality right now? I don't understand. Right.
Yeah. It's like, this is the time. This is your time to shine.
There's 3 of them. Right.
Yeah. But then this is where we get what you were talking about before. It's just that compassion when you see Superman talking to them.
So gently to them.
Yeah. And that's what, we talk about, I think, why this show works and why I love the incarnation, this George Reeves incarnation of Superman so much, and why it resonated with this whole generation. It's one thing that he's so tough. I love that aspect of his Clark and his Superman, that toughness, but it's balanced out by that gentleness, by that compassion. And I think that goes such a long way. And yes, that's on full display in this scene. And you see the Mole Men communicating, through their gestures as they can, right? As one of them explains. Yeah.
Superman caught him. They got shot and he caught him.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's interesting not to get too deep into this, but it's like the moment they don't seem to have. I mean, that's the only thing we see as far as their means of communicating with each other,
Yeah.
or others' gestures. They don't seem, other than the scream, like they don't seem to make any sounds
No.
or yeah,
Maybe they didn't want to come up with a language for them, so they decided to make them be silent, and this
silent. Yeah,
way, and then just pantomime what's going on. I don't know, but it's
that's fine.
it's interesting. The thing you brought up about Luke, where Superman stands between him and the ray gun, basically. Like, it's so interesting how certain things carry over. Do you watch My Adventures with Superman? Have you been watching the show?
Yes, I am a few
Okay.
episodes behind though. I've only seen the first few,
I
but
don't
I
think this
love what
is
I
a
saw.
major spoiler. I hope
It's
it's not.
fine. That's fine.
But there's a bit where a machine is firing these weapons at Lois, and Superman jumps in front, and when it does, it's ripping open his shirt. He's not wearing the costume, but it's ripping open his shirt and exposing his chest. And he's standing there, and she says to him, "You didn't know you were bulletproof. That you were going to be immune to the bullets." And and he got weakened because they were special bullets. And he just says over his shoulder to her, he goes, "I knew you weren't." And that's why he dove in front of the bullets, right? Because he would have done that for anybody. I mean, he would have done that for any human. It just happened to be Lois in this case. But that's sort of the same thing with Luke Benson in this. Is he's jumping in front of the thing because he's not bulletproof. He knows the guy can't take it. I don't know what's going to do to me, but I'm still going to jump in front of it on the off chance I'll be okay. So I just
No,
thought it was good.
no, that's a great point. I'm glad I need to catch up on that, and I will.
So good.
But no, I'm glad you brought that up because no, that is a great point, right? This is an unknown, just like the unknown people. It's an unknown weapon, right? So he
Yeah.
doesn't know what this is going to do, but he's still willing to put himself in between that and Luke Benson, who by any account would deserve whatever's coming his way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's great. And although the next scene, then Superman goes to the hospital and he gets the patient to bring back to them, and he's so convinced. He's like, if we give him back to them, they'll go and they'll leave us alone.
Yeah,
like,
well,
yeah,
that's
right.
his optimistic view, I guess. Yeah, absolutely. I did like, though, when they were struggling with the patient, when he comes over and scoops him up and carries him back to the hole. It's himself. I thought that was kind of cool. But
yeah, and it's just little things like when Superman and the Moment are walking off together and he's carrying the patient, and it's just like, we go back to tying this all full circle, right? Just the presence. He's not flying. He's not doing, like, he's just walking. And it's just like, oh, Superman is there.
Right. And he does with the cape flapping as he walks. The wind blows the cape. I love it. I mean, this is where I'm the little boy again, right? Watching this thing today. I'm watching it. And when the cape started flapping as he's carrying the guy, the Mole Man, I was just like, I was just smiling. It was just such a great moment for me, enjoying it. Just reminds me of why I love this character so much. Yes, a cape flapping reminded me of that. I don't know why. It just did. The whole image.
No, it's beautiful. I watched this. I mean, before preparing for this episode, I watched Superman and the Mole Man or The Unknown People at least once, maybe twice. And then I watched it twice in preparation. And the last viewing, more than any other, I really got caught up in it, and I really was more on board with it than I ever had been before, and enjoyed it more than I ever had. So yeah, no, it's so strong, and then that leads to our final scene, which we had alluded to earlier, where the Mole Men return, and after they go back underground, they fire that beam up, right, to destroy the drill,
well,
or just
or
the
whatever
larger installation, basically, which I appreciated, because it's like, okay, like that's the end of this, right? We're not, there are no return appearances. This accounts for why you don't see them again or anything like that. But yes, we do get that, somewhat clumsy, awkward final line from Lois.
And Lois has the last line. All Superman does is go,
yeah.
I don't understand that,
I know.
Now, 2 weeks later, the military came in, they dug it open again, and they did an invasion into the underground to discover what's down there. But anyway.
I know. I was looking on the Jim Nolt's Adventures Continue website, and there, I guess he has the original script, and there was another scene that was intended to follow that, where Lois and Clark and Craig are driving out of town, and Lois is saying something like, "Oh, Clark, you won't believe what you missed," or like something like that.
Right.
And then I think as they're leaving, like, if I'm remembering this correctly, and forgive me, audience, if I'm not, but I think Craig stops the car and he picks up a handful of dirt and like throws it at the sign that says, "Welcome to Silsby, home of the world's largest oil well," or something like that.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd rather
whatever.
end on Superman and Lois than that. To tell you the truth, I think I may not have liked the delivery of the line and Superman just nodding his head, but that was a good at least image, the visual of the two of them there with the flames sort of reflected on them. I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was well done.
I agree. We were talking earlier about, again, suspension of disbelief with the dual identity, and yes, it's always a stretch. It's always a stretch when we're talking about this, but especially in the context of the show, but especially in episodes like this and Rescue or the Deserted Village, when Lois and Clark are out of town, and Superman shows up. I feel like that always,
Whenever Superman's in Niagara Falls, Superman 2, right? Oh, interesting.
yeah, we
Yeah,
go
do
with
it all
it,
the
but
time. You
yeah.
have to go with it. I mean, if you can, that's the one thing you cannot question too strongly, or the whole thing falls apart. You either believe or you don't, and that's really what it comes down to with this.
So the last thing I'm going to have us do is give our rating. So at the end of every episode, we rate what we've watched on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras. So let that marinate how many fedoras you would give Superman in the moment. But in the
Okay.
meantime, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
Oh God, I can't imagine so. I mean, we handled this thing scene by scene, and no, it's just it's. I think for what it has aged very well in a lot of ways. I'm not talking about effects per se, but in terms of what it is and what it was trying to do. I think it's aged very well. And it was really a pleasure watching it again. I haven't seen it in years. So watching it again today for me was really it was engaging. I mean, I don't always yes, I'll always be engaged by watching Superman, but to watch an episode from 1951 or a movie from 1951 and get so sucked in so easily, that's really was my takeaway, and it's like that speaks a lot about the quality of the film.
No, I hear you. I think, again, my opinion of it improved a lot. Not that I was down on it, but it really improved a lot. And at the end of the day, do I gravitate more towards the kind of short film crime dramas of the rest of the first season?
Mm,
Yes. But again, I do think, as far as just conveying the morality and the overall philosophy of Superman, this story really accomplishes a lot.
yeah,
And so I really came away appreciating it in a way that I hadn't before. So on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras, how many would you give Superman in the moment?
I would. I mean, because I have to consider what I consider great. Like Superman the movie is going to be 5, right? So I have to go. I would
Well,
go with
no,
a.
within the context of just of Adventures of
Oh,
Superman.
Adventures of Super. Oh, well, in that case, I mean, I would probably go 4.5 with this, just because I really love this movie, and it, in so many ways, it embodies Superman. It really embodies the character of Superman in ways that the show itself doesn't, that the series doesn't a lot of times. He shows up to deal with the problems. He shows up to, you know what I mean? It's like, and yeah, there's some cool episodes. Don't get me wrong. Of course, now I don't remember any of the names of them, but there's some very cool episodes, and through the course of the show. But in this one, it's more than him just showing up to be the hero. He's playing this active role in trying to change people's minds, in saving the lives of these strange creatures, and conveying what we should all be feeling towards other beings that are different from us, or anybody who's different than us, right? So yeah, so I would give it definitely. I would have to say, I don't know if it's perfect or not, but I'd say 4 fedoras if you're just basing it on Adventures of Superman.
Well said. I would go with 4 as well.
Mm.
A strong 4.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I really, I really enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, I mean, again, on paper, the whole idea of subterranean beings who emerge, that doesn't necessarily grab me. But yeah,
Right.
the way that Clark and Superman are challenged in this,
Yeah.
and the position they take, what they articulate, and what it ultimately says about the character, really goes a long way. So listen, thank you so much. This was really, I'm glad we were able to connect. We knew we were going to have you on at some point. I'm glad it ended
Right.
up being for this. This
Yeah.
felt
Me too.
appropriate.
This is the one. Yeah. This is the one
Uh,
for me.
so we had mentioned, of course, your book, Voices from Krypton. I hope everyone will go and check that out. What else would you like to direct people toward?
Oh, geez. I mean, the book is the main thing right now. I've also got I've got a comic, a Superman parody comic that I do online called Fleischer, and right now I'm doing an unfolding comic strip called Fleischer and the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. which is a rewrite of L. Frank Baum's first Oz novel. I took Dorothy out, put Fleischer in, and I'm rewriting as appropriate. So it's a novel and a comic strip, and it can be found on Webtoons. Yeah, and at FleischerVerse.com. Yeah, that's grandiose, but yeah, that's my sort of main thing. Outside of the books, I do these things for escapism and just fun. And whether or not it takes off, who knows? But check it out; you might enjoy it.
Very cool. And if they want to kind of follow you, do you want to give a social media handle or website?
Sure. I mean, I have a website, actually. This is the best place, is edgrosswriter.com. Only recently launched, probably about 6 months ago. And I just go on there to do my musings and news about me or books I'm writing and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's probably the best place.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Me too.
So I appreciate you taking the time. Audience, thank you for joining us for this episode and for all of our season 1 coverage. I really, really do appreciate it. Again, we'll be back with season 2 later in 2024. So stay tuned. Make sure you are subscribed via your audio podcast platform of choice. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Connect on social media. You can follow Digging for Kryptonite, which is our parent podcast. Follow Digging for Kryptonite on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can join the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network on Facebook if you like. If you want to shoot me an email with any comments or questions, flatsquirrelproductions@gmail.com. And I look forward to continuing our exploration of Adventures of Superman with season 2 in 2024. Until then, I do encourage you, please check out my other podcast, Digging for Kryptonite. We cover Superman across time and media. So if you are truly squarely focused just on Adventures of Superman, I understand. But if you enjoy Superman generally and you want to hear conversations about other stories through the years, I hope you will check that out. And again, I look forward to beginning our season 2 coverage next year. Until then, adventures await. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.